The Lugdunum is a Tier 6 premium pan-European battleship and the reward for the new Road to New Year marathon that began in the October 2025 update. The marathon runs for approximately 3 months. It ends during the January update, and according to the little blog article that Wargaming released, the end date is January 19th, but the Lugdunum itself becomes available starting December 1st. You'll need 20,000 ship parts in order to complete the marathon and obtain the ship, but apparently you can earn up to 42,500 by the marathon's end without spending any money in the game, unlike last time with the Hindenburg Marathon, where I think you did at least have to buy the Admiralty backing on all three of the campaigns in those three updates. This time, though, apparently no Admiralty backing is necessary as long as you play the game enough to grind out 20,000 ship parts. You can obtain this ship for free, and I can already hear some of the complaints on the various internet forums about the incentive to play the game more, maybe not necessarily to log in on a daily basis, like the calendar events, but the time sink required in order to obtain a ship like this. Some people probably won't be happy about it, and some people will say it's preying on FOMO. However, I thought of another acronym last night, the opposite of FOMO. Let's call it ROMO, relief of missing out. There's nothing really FOMO about the Lugdunum. It's basically a copy-paste of the French Tier 6 tech tree battleship Lyon with some major differences. I'm going to put my commander build on the screen now as we set up for our initial battle on this Charlie flank. There's only one pan-European battleship commander available at the present times, and it's Janko Vukovic, who is basically a secondary battleship commander. And if you look at the overview tab of the Lugdunum, it does mention that it has main guns aplenty. After all, it is a Lyon with 16 main battery guns. But then it also says increased secondary range. And so, from all you can tell about reading the in-game description of the ship and looking at the stats, Wargaming seems to want you to build this thing for secondaries, and it just so happens that Janko Vukovic is a secondary commander. Although unlike other secondary commanders, in his first row of skills you can choose between Brawler, which gives you a 10% reload bonus at the expense of 10% less main battery range, or Reckless Gunman, which gives you an 8% reload buff and nerfs the torpedo acquisition range by 15%, meaning you don't see torpedoes quite as early, but I'd rather take that than nerfing the main battery range. So we've got that going. We've got Porcupine, we've got Firefighter and Master Mechanic, and of course the two inspirations are Hipper and Kondo. The stats that we go over are going to be influenced by this build. Now, to begin with, the Lugdunum, as we reverse in here toward these Californias to get our secondary singing, the Lugdunum is not the most survivable ship you've ever seen. It's got 53,400 HP, and the armor scheme doesn't offer all that much protection. The bow and the stern both have 26mm plating, although they both do have an icebreaker that's thick enough to bounce any battleship shells. I don't know that it necessarily protects the citadel. Maybe it does, but you can still get slapped through the bow. And while the deck armor is 30, and the upper belt armor is much thicker than that and able to bounce any battleship guns, this thing doesn't seem to up-tier all that well against Tier 7, where you're facing a lot of 16-inch guns, maybe even some 18-inch guns in the form of Georgia. It does tend to take quite a bit of damage, and I don't know that it's super effective as a brawler necessarily. The Citadel's not all that exposed, really. It sits at the waterline, but it's still hittable, and so I think you do need to be careful. As for the main batteries, I'm not super impressed. There are 16 guns. They are the smaller French 340mm guns, so not quite 15-inch. Not a lot of overmatch there or anything. And the range, without the ability to spec flammable cannoneer, because there is no pan-European battleship commander for that, we've gotten stuck with a 15.9 kilometer range, although the reload is quite snappy at 23 seconds. However, you'll notice as we're turning here that the turrets are not really keeping up with our turn. We've got a 51.4 second main battery turret 180-degree turn time. That's an eternity. You really have to pre-plan to get these turrets to stay on target. If you're not good at that, you'll probably struggle a little bit with this ship. And of course, you can improve that terrible turret traverse time by using something like the turret traverse mod in the fourth or first slot, or using the crisscross skill on the commander. But if you do that, then you've got to give up porcupine for the secondary range, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. In any case, the only way to improve that is to give up the secondary range, and that's one of the things I think you'd want to build into the ship for. Otherwise, you've just kind of got a Lyon. The shell grouping and accuracy on these main battery guns is in no way impressive. It's got a shell grouping or sigma rating of 1.6, which is terrible, and the dispersion numbers don't look all that fantastic. As for how much damage they do, well, the AP does a maximum of 7,800 when it hits a citadel, and the HE does a maximum of 4,100 with a 24% fire chance. So you might want to switch between the two shells intermittently. I think we're going to do that here against one of the Californias, where we will switch to HE when he's bow tanking us. It's going to be easier to get fires and pens with the HE in that kind of scenario. The AP and the main battery guns in general are just so inaccurate that it's not like you can really pinpoint the AP into the pennable superstructure of something like a California, even at 9 kilometers. The accuracy just isn't there. So if that's the kind of thing that frustrates you, you might want to build this for main batteries in order to get really anything out of the main battery guns. They are just very inaccurate, but that's maybe okay with the secondaries here. You can see them opening up against the California. I think we already had some hits on the other California, and you'll notice we have 4 fires already. These secondaries are a little bit different than what you would find on another French secondary battleship like the Flandre, for example, at Tier 7. That thing is loaded with a litany of 90mm secondaries that quite literally can pen no armor surfaces that ship is going to encounter. Different story here on the Lugdunum. All of the secondaries are the French destroyer gun size, 130mm, and there are a ton of them. There's one group of 16 and one group of 8 of them for, I think, a total of, 24 secondaries? It's a lot of them. With this build using Porcupine, the secondary module in the first module slot, and then Hipper as one inspiration, we've got 9.1 kilometers. You could push that out a little bit further if instead of using Kondo as the second inspiration like I do, you used somebody like Haruna or Fernandez. You could probably get this into the mid 9 km or high 9 km range. I don't think you're really getting up to 10, but that's pretty good range for a Tier 6 battleship. Even the other secondary focused ones, there are a couple that exist, only get up around 9 kilometers. Nothing too crazy about that. The fire chance on these secondaries is pretty good too, at 9%. They reload in 4 seconds, and they actually pen 22mm of armor. So at the very least, they'll be penning the armor surfaces of pretty much every destroyer you're going to encounter. And of course, they're going to pen battleship superstructure and things like that. Speaking of destroyers, you would think a Tashkent 39, played by somebody who's been at this game for 6 years, well, you would think they'd be a little bit more threatening than this. But, well, you see the secondaries do a pretty good job, and eventually, a lot of the main battery guns will hit. So, there you go. No close quarters expert, though. We only get a fist. How sad. The AA defense rating on this thing is an aggregate of 76. It can't defend itself against CVs, though. I've run into a couple. Not very good at shooting down planes. Wouldn't count on that. Maneuverability, however, that is a highlight on this thing. It's very good. It's got a 700-meter turning circle, which is really small for a battleship. Makes it pretty agile, I would say. and a 27 knot speed with a 14.1 second rudder shift time. And then, of course, the concealment with Kondo as one of the inspirations is 11.8, so we're quite stealthy. So basically, what we have here is a French battleship copy paste with a ton of main battery guns that have questionable accuracy, and then a litany of secondaries, which are very good at starting fires. So I think it's meant to be somewhat of a French brawler. And it can do that, I suppose. We've seen some examples of that here, but this is a Tier 6 versus a Tier 5 match. In this kind of matchmaking, I found that the ship is pretty alright. But up against Tier 7s with the armor scheme, the lack of accuracy on the main battery guns, the slow turret traverse, all of that stuff, just doesn't necessarily stand up too well. So I'd say this ship is pretty mid, honestly. However, it is a free Tier 6 premium that you can acquire just by playing the game. And Tier 6 premiums are valuable. They offer some of the best credit earnings you can get in World of Warships Legends. This battle, however, is wrapping up. We hit that Spanish cruiser over there, and then, well, he's just going to run away and disappear. So we're going to win this battle. And this is, I guess, sort of an average result that I've gotten in the Lugdunum. I've played probably about 15-20 games in it over the past couple of weeks, and these are sort of the results I'm getting. Not super high damage, sometimes high XP. Secondaries don't reward you all that much, though. And I've had an okay time with it, but it's not something I'd be playing regularly. So if you have any fear of missing out on this thing because you don't think you can complete the marathon, I wouldn't really worry about it. This is not the caliber of ship like something, say, Jean Bar or Lenin or something like that. It's not one of these super prizes. It's fairly mid. So take that with what you will. Use that information how you want. Give the video a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.